You know what America needs? Another tax cut for the rich. At least that is according to the Trump administration. The New York Times is reporting that the Trump administration is now considering bypassing Congress using executive authority in order to grant a $100 billion tax cut that is going to go mainly to wealthy people. Now, this Steven Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, former Goldman Sachs guy, said in an interview on the sidelines of the Group of 20 summit meeting in Argentina that his department was looking at whether they could use their regulatory powers, the Treasury Department, to allow Americans to account for inflation in determining capital gains tax liabilities. It's like, oh, well, Americans, they should be able to look at inflation. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to see if we have the power to use regulation in order to decrease tax burden. Now, the problem with this is that, for one, a lot of normal Americans might be sold like, oh, they want to lower our taxes. Well, that's great. I'm all for lowering taxes for regular Americans. The problem here is, number two, is that that's not what this is going to do. This is mainly going to go to incredibly wealthy people. Now, let me give you some of the details first before I get into that. And now, the Treasury Department says that they could change the definition of cost for calculating capital gains, which would allow taxpayers to adjust the initial value of an asset, such as a home or a share of stock, for inflation when they sell it. Now, currently, capital gains taxes are determined by subtracting the original price of an asset from the price at which it was sold and then taxing the difference. Let me give you an example here. If a high earner spent about $100,000 on stock in 1980, then sold it for $1 million today, they would owe taxes on $900,000. However, if the original purchase price was adjusted for inflation, they would only be taxed for $300,000 of that because it knocks off 20%. So her taxable gain is $700,000. That would actually end up saving the investor about $40,000. So that sounds great, right? Oh my God, look at that. We're going to save so much money when we sell homes and when we sell stock. Sell stock. Well, thing is, who's going to benefit more from this? Wealthy people, wealthy investors. In fact, independent analyses suggest that more than 97% of the benefits of indexing capital gains for inflation would go to the top 10% of income earners in America. In fact, nearly two-thirds of the benefits would go to the super rich, the top 0.1% of American income earners. So 97% would go to the top 10%. Oops. Now wait, I thought Donald Trump here did not like the global financial elite. And look, to be honest, we all know what he meant by that. This was sort of a dog whistle to his alt-right base that thinks that Jews run the banks. So by campaigning against the global financial elite, he actually meant Jewish people. It's anti-Semitism. But anyway, as far as that goes, and the reason that I bring that up is how's he going to explain this to his base? Oh, you know that global financial elite that we were railing against? It turns out I just gave them an enormous tax cut, 97%. Oops. Not only that, but he also has to explain how he's going to do this and how he's going to do this legally. And the reason that I say that is that he would have to give the Treasury Department the power, the executive power, in order to change this by fiat. Now, wait a minute. For those of you, for conservatives who are worried, too much executive power, we have a concentration of executive power under King Obama. Well, where are they? Where are those people that are saying, now wait a minute, we shouldn't have so much executive power? Oh, it turns out they're silent. Well, most are silent, and there are some that are actually way in favor. In fact, let me give you an example of this. You have Ryan Ellis, who's a tax lobbyist in Washington and former tax policy director at the Americans for Tax Reform. He says that, look, this will goose the economy by unleashing a wave of asset sales. You'll get the benefit, the main economic benefit, the day, the month after the Treasury ends up doing this. Representative Kevin Brady of Texas said, I think we ought to look at not penalizing Americans for inflation. Now, Grover Norquist also said that making the change would raise revenue for the government by creating new economic efficiencies and faster growth. Quote, I think it's going to happen, and it's going to be huge. Is it going to be huge like the giant tax cuts for the rich that were passed before? Because most of that also went to the super rich, while wages are at 2.8%. 2.7%, and inflation, as I'm going to mention later on, is at 2.7%. So wages are essentially flat, and a lot of these companies, or almost all these companies that benefited from their gigantic tax cuts, bought back their own stock. And that's what they did with the money. They just basically put it back in their own pockets. Didn't go to you, didn't go to the workers, and that's by design. Now, here's the thing. How come they don't care about inflation until it impacts the rich? Which it does. It impacts everybody. Now, the most recent wage growth, as I mentioned, for regular workers was 2.7%. All that wage growth, I know all that sounds like it's a lot, right? It's really not. That was wiped out by that inflation. Why isn't the Trump administration doing something about that and making sure that we raise workers' wages? It turns out they don't really care about that. But when it comes to rich people dealing with inflation, for example, on their stocks, oh, we got to do something. Their hair's on fire, and they got to do something right now, and they're considering using executive orders, executive power, to be able to do so. And that, of course, can be problematic, as I'll explain later. But as far as things that they also don't care about, the deficit. Because guess what? The most recent estimates put the tax cut at around $1.9 trillion of extra deficit that's being added. Way to go. I thought you guys were supposed to be fiscally responsible, but turns out you're not. Now, let me go into more details here. According to the budget model used by the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, indexing capital gains to inflation would reduce the government revenues by $102 billion over the next decade, with 86% of the benefits going to the top 1%. So, oh, look at that. Now we're reducing government revenue by $102 billion. It's $102 billion less over the next 10 years that we can spend on roads, bridges, schools, clean drinking water, which Flint still does not have, and we're going to give 86% of that benefit to the rich. Haven't we already, at one point, do the rich have enough? At what point are they going to say, you know what, we're done with tax cuts for the rich. They don't need any more. It looks like we got them. We got it. Worked out just great for the rich. Now let's focus on something else. Or is there even a limit? And I don't think that there is. I think they'd be happy at 0% tax rates for the rich. Which is, you can't do that. Anyway, there's more. A July report from the Congressional Research Service said that the additional debt incurred by indexing capital gains to inflation would most likely offset any stimulus that the smaller tax burden provided the economy, wiping out whatever tiny little amount of stimulus the tax cuts had. Now, the report also said that it is unlikely, however, that a significant or any effect on economic growth would occur from a standalone indexing proposal, which is probably why Republicans also want to add in another tax cut for the rich. Now, the good news is they're unlikely to be able to do this, as the Treasury Department doesn't actually have the authority. Now, how do we know that? Well, okay, first, let's go back to if they try to do this, it's going to end up being challenged in court because it turns out that it might actually be unconstitutional, that the executive branch, the Treasury Department, just does not have the ability to bypass Congress to give giant tax cuts. Great. Now, the precedent here is very interesting. You have the Bush administration, not the George H.W. Bush, but the George W. Bush administration, the original George W. Bush, back in 1992. They looked at this and they said, boy, we sure would love to index capital gains to inflation, and we'd love to do this without having to push it through those liberals in Congress. Let's see if we can bypass them. Now it turns out they realized that we do not have the authority to do this, and they decided to drop it. Now, of course, knowing the Trump administration, they are likely to just do it anyway because they don't care. Their whole purpose is to grab as many tax cuts for rich people as they can get away with before they are railroaded out of office. Because, look, the thing is, that's who they care about, right? All they care about are the wealthy donors. Even Donald Trump, that's all he cares about is rich people because that's his people. And he's like, I'm a rich people, even though I don't think he is. I don't think he's rich at all, at least not nearly as rich as he says he is. And he's been trying to cover it up. Hashtag release the tax returns. But all he cares about is being part of that club. And so that's why he's on board with all this stuff, these tax cuts, and because it benefits him too. And also the politicians that go along with it, well, it benefits their donors. And because, look, those are the people who fund them. Those are the people they will eventually go to work for once they're out of office. That is, I think, is the singular reason we need to get money out of politics. This is insanity that we have a system like this, that we have politicians that can get into power and then cut taxes for places that they're either fund them through campaign donations or independent expenditures, or that they can have a promise for a better job once they get out of office, that revolving door. We've got to change that system. It's a sick system, and it basically allows the plundering and robbing of the American people by the ultra-rich.